This is FLOSS Weekly. I'm Doc Searls. This week, Simon Phipps and I are talking to Roberto Di Cosmo of Software Heritage. And it's a terrific topic and it's an action-packed hour. And that's coming up next.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is FLOSS Weekly, episode 616, recorded Wednesday, February 10th, 2021. Software Heritage. This episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Barracuda. Hackers are always looking for the weakest link in your security configuration, especially in your email security. Barracuda's new threat analyzer tool helps you gain visibility into your particular vulnerabilities. Visit barracuda.com/floss. Good morning, good evening, and good time wherever you are. I am Doc Searls, and this is FLOSS Weekly. I'm joined this week by Simon Phipps. There he is.
Still here.
Looking good, sounding good. So, I'm in Santa Barbara, and you are in Southampton, I assume, still?
Yes, I'm in Southampton. I'm in my backup office because the computer in my main office stopped working. So this is an unfamiliar location. There should be a cat sitting in that chair you see in the mirror behind me. But apart from that, this is my normal environment at the moment.
Everybody should have a cat. Real or virtual. It's enough of both. So
I'm here. You can have them as a lawyer these days, even.
I've seen this. We're not supposed to talk politics, but that there is. Look up cat and lawyer, and you'll see what it is.
Okay. Thanks.
People are increasingly operated by their cats. A good friend of mine, like our guest today. From Italy says that cats were sent to Earth to domesticate the standing monkeys, he calls it. So that's that's the case. So Roberto Di Cosmo.
I do.
Already,
long time ago, back on the OSI board, I was approached by a professor in Paris to consider having OSI endorse this thing called Software Heritage, which was going to be it's the Internet Archive of software. And that was, I think, the first time I really got to know Roberto, who I'd met a few times before. And over the years, he's become one of my favorite people to spend time with, urbane and charming, razor-sharp intelligent, hugely self-effacing and humble, but fearless when it comes to talking to politicians about the things that harm society in connection with technology. So, one of the unspoken heroes of the modern digital rights realm, I would say. You've heard all of the more obvious names, but Software Heritage, the project that Roberto has pioneered, is one of the wonders of the digital world. It's the Library of Alexandria of the modern era, and it takes a deft pair of hands to bring it into being, get it funded, get it staffed, and keep it running. So yes, I know Roberto, and I love drinking wine and eeting food with him in Paris.
You spared me reading the bio.
May I just say, for the people that can't see us live, that I'm officially blushing right now. Okay, for the people who are just listening. Okay.
So we've gotten a jump on the show. So we're going to cover just a little bit of news first. Simon, I know you have some, and I'll follow, and then we'll get into the show. Yes,
yeah. So I was in Brussels. I attended a virtual meeting that should have been around what would have been FOSDEM last weekend. The group of people who are interested in digital rights issues in the European Union got together, and in particular they launched a report that is going to be published fairly soon, where they have surveyed European industry and the European public sector to put numbers behind the impact of open source on the European economy. And at the same time as that, I published a paper as an input to that meeting talking about the big challenge for legislators, which is that they're not seeking out the interests and voices of the category of society that creates all of these things, what you might call citizen creators or individual innovators. That the post-industrial society really only sees two roles for citizens, either as consumers or as a unit of work. But there is a third category of wealth creator and innovator, of which open source developers are a part. And other people who are a part of that are self-published writers and self-published musicians and other people who use the internet to produce a network effect far beyond what you might expect from them as an individual. And the report that came out from the European Union really highlights the massive impact that open source has had on the European economy and the crucial role that it plays, to the extent that if we were to see another incident where a piece of legislation threatens to shut down open source, as the revised copyright directive did, we would see an incredibly bad impact on the economy of Europe. So that was the core story, and I know that interests you as well, Doc. What did you think of that report from that was published at the Open Forum Europe meeting?
Yeah, that was my story as well. An interesting thing is that the first I saw of it was on ZDNet, a piece there which was linkless, so I had to look and find out. Being a U.S. guy, I did not know Open Forum Europe existed or this study was going on. I think it's fine. I think it's good for exactly what you were talking about, which is to discourage anything that would thwart open source development and would fail to recognize the boundless power, the rising tide that lifts all economic and social boats that open source development comprises, and the open source code base, which we'll be talking about in a minute, comprises together. It's massive. There's also a side of me that says, you make money because of open source, not with it. J.P. Rangaswamy and I came up with that line, 10, 15 years ago, and I think it's important that you don't look for everything to make money. You look for, when the internet itself doesn't make any money. The TCP/IP protocol, the HTTP, all of the open FTP, all of the open protocols have no burden of income on them. So, we really need to recognize the massive second order effects that exist because of open source and free software development, and because of the L in FLOSS, the library side of this thing. So. We can talk more about that because I think it's extremely germane to our topic today. But first, I have to let you all know that this episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Barracuda. Hackers are always looking for the weakest link in your security configuration, especially in your email security. If you can find your vulnerabilities first, you can defend against cyber attacks. That's where Barracuda's new threat analyzer tool comes in. From traditional malware to the latest spear phishing, account takeover, and conversation hijacking, Barracuda has identified 13 types of email threats. And the thing is, it takes several different layers of security working together to protect you effectively against all 13 threat types. If you're not fully protected, cyber crooks are going to figure out where you're vulnerable. It's literally what they spend all their time on. When they find the gap in your security, they just need to choose the right threat type and customize it to get into your system, which can end up costing you millions of dollars and your reputation in the market. And here's where it gets hard. With hundreds of highly targeted, personalized threat variants emerging daily, and in many different kinds of on-premises and cloud-based email systems, it can be really challenging to identify your specific gaps and vulnerabilities. That's what the Barracuda Threat Analyzer is for. It's incredibly simple and fast to use. Go to barracuda.com/floss and answer a few multiple choice questions about your email security setup. It takes about 2 minutes And the Barracuda Threat Analyzer provides a custom report telling you which threat types you're most vulnerable to. And you get custom recommendations on how to strengthen your defenses against those attacks. It's free and very easy to use. Barracuda's December spearphishing report found 12% of all spearphishing attacks are business email compromise, and that's up 7% from 2019. That kind of growth shows how successful these attacks can be. According to the FBI's most recent Internet Crime Report, business email compromise attacks led to over $3.5 billion in losses. The government of Puerto Rico lost $2.6 million on a single attack last year. Even Shark Tank's Barbara Corcoran fell for one of those attacks last year. Her employees fell for an impersonation attack and paid a fake invoice wiring almost $400,000. They were lucky enough to realize what they had done in time to recover the money. Manor Independent School District in Texas wasn't as lucky. They made fraudulent payments over a whole month, losing $2.3 million before the attack was discovered. So does your email security protect against those attacks? Try the Barracuda Threat Analyzer today for free and get a full report showing exactly what you need to do to secure your email. Go to barracuda.com/floss to find out where your hidden threats lie. That's Barracuda Threat Analyzer at barracuda.com/floss. Okay, and welcome this morning, my time, it's your time wherever you're watching or listening to this, to Roberto Di Cosmo of the Software Heritage. Simon did just a fabulous job of introducing you earlier, Roberto. We talked last week, so and we have so much to cover, and it's relevant to the news this morning. Maybe we should start with that. This new report by the OFE in Europe. What does that do for you, or how do you contribute to that? What's the relevance of that for your work?
Well, let me take the things in another way. Okay, actually, what you have seen today is this kind of a news of the report, which is a study on the impact of open source in Europe, which is an important thing to do. It is not the first such report that we see, but we can hope that this can awaken a little bit our policymaker.
There was a loss there. Do we want to?
Yes.
I'm talking to headquarters here. Roberto, there was a dropout, for me anyway.
I do not know. Okay, let me try again. So what I can say about this report is that it is not the first time we see such kind of reports on the impact on open source, but I think it is the first time we see a report that has such visibility in the European Commission. During the presentation of the report, for example, Thierry Breton, who is a commissioner, was present to say some words, and so this gives some political clout to this result. What I do hope is that this kind of reports will help us avoid other threats to our common knowledge, our common software, to the open source we are all developing and cherishing, because these kind of challenges are multiple. And as Simon mentioned before, just a couple of years ago, we had to spend an inordinate amount of time to fight a reform of copyright law in Europe that was actually threatening all of software, open source software development. And the incredible thing is that, as Simon said, it was, I wouldn't say friendly fires, because it was not coming from France, right? But it was not enemy fire either. So we were just collateral effect of a modification or regulation about copyright law that the people in place just forgot was going to impact all of software development, and in particular open source. So we at Software Heritage actually had to spend an incredible amount of time doing, let's call it with its name, lobbying at very different levels to get exception in that regulation to protect not only big companies like Red Hat or Microsoft or GitHub that maintain infrastructure which is for profit, but also the incredible amount of infrastructure which are not for profit. I mean, so distributions like Debian, package management systems, or say PyPy, CTAN, CRAN, whatever, and also, of course, Software Heritage, which is non-profit, from the challenge which was written in this kind of regulation. And so I do hope that this report will just make sure that the policymaker have a bell ringing in their head when this kind of new regulation are going to come into play. We could hope for more. Okay, we could hope for more. We could hope for actually seeing Europe for once actually having a clear strategy for leveraging the advantage of open source. There are some signs of this. So the European Commission has announced that they will create a small open source program office. Now I'm also happy to share with you another news that you probably didn't follow. I mean, we had a similar struggle here in France where it was proposed to have a sort of government open source program office set up. It was not at all easy to win the battle, but there was a decision taken by the Prime Minister just last week on Friday. So this structure will see the light. We will know the details a little bit later. We'll see the light probably by the end of the month. So these are small signs, but these are signs that things are probably starting to change. So let's hope it stays that way.
Yeah. So, I think those are hugely positive, Roberto. The Open Source Program Office for the European Commission is a great development, even if it's very small and modestly funded at the moment. And the work in France is key as well. And I think that the European Commission's work will lead to more of those activities taking place, because the existence of the European Open Source Program Office is going to have a ripple effect throughout all of the member countries of the EU.
I fully agree. I mean, there is a symbolic value to this, more than just a number of people taking place in this operation right now. The symbolic value of recognition is important, but we need to go much further, because, we fought together this battle for the copyright law, Simon, a couple of years ago, but it is not the only one. You remember we worked together on this Paris Code Declaration on the importance of software source code that we wrote at UNESCO together. Today, I'm spending a lot of time in the open science space. I mean, this is this huge movement that is pushing to open the result of science to everybody, that has been put in the limelight by the COVID-19 crisis, because everybody knows that the speed of the reaction comes from this open science movement. And yet, even inside that movement, software and open source software is not yet recognized at its own value. Okay, people talk about articles, people talk about data, and they forget about software. And this is a day-to-day struggle to actually push our agenda further, not because it is our agenda, but because we are protecting a very important part of human knowledge, which is software source code. And I agree with you. We see some good signs, but sometimes even if I'm very patient, sometimes I lose my patience, because we have been in this battle for almost 30 years now, and you would hope to have seen this kind of progress so much earlier, right? But let's be positive, let's be happy about what is changing right now. But just to jump to maybe the subject of what we are doing today, when we started this mission about software heritage some 5 years ago, the idea was actually to protect source code, which is a precious part of mankind's commons. It is not just a technical object. If people listening to us here can retain something of what I try to convey here, it is what we are doing as developers, as programmers, is not just technical. It's much more than that. We are encoding human ingenuity and creativity into the lines of code we are writing. It's a creative work. It's part of our cultural and organizational heritage, and this must be recognized and must be protected. So when we started Software Heritage, the idea was to protect it from being lost. Creating an archive that makes sure that everything is preserved over a long time. It is not disrupted, it is not erased. We started working before Google Growth was shut down in 2015, before Gitorious.org was shut down in 2015, and we are keeping doing some firefighting work, to save code which is in danger, massively in danger today. What I didn't imagine 5 years ago is that software edge would become something which is much more than just a technological undertaking. It is actually a policy or a political undertaking, but in the positive sense. So we are actually trying to protect software also in the policy space. That's the reason why we're active on this copyright reform, the reason why we collaborate with UNESCO, the reason why we discuss with ministries all over the place to actually push the idea that software is a thing, software is important, and they need to take care of it, even if they do not understand it. Okay? So it's the fact that you have many decision makers that do not have a clear mental model of what software development is can be an excuse for a bit of time, right? But not too much. At some moment you need to take responsibility if you are in a position of power and actually recognize when something is important and make sure it can thrive. Well, let me stop here. I have a tendency to talk too much about this. Okay.
So I described software heritage as kind of the Internet Archive, but for software. Is that a good description? How would you describe software heritage to people who are new to it on the show today?
Yeah, that's a possibility. The Internet Archive is a wonderful undertaking. We have been using it for, a lot of people have been using it for a very long time. So it's a good approximation. Let's say Internet Archive for software source code. But actually, when you start looking at the details, what we do as software is much more sophisticated. Okay, so we actually get all the software that comes from all software development platforms around the world, from different version control systems, from different packaging managers or formats that are all around. We bring all together in a single gigantic graph that keep track of all the software development, of all the duplication of software from one place to the other. We are basically building a gigantic telescope to observe the evolution, the galaxy of software development over time, which is an incredible, fascinating adventure. So it is much more than just a library. So the idea is not just having a library that keeps books that maybe somebody will read in some years, okay? It's much more. It is actually a live observatory of how software evolution evolves over time, software development evolves over time. So it's actually not just the past, it's really also the present. And we hope by adding new functionalities, new tools to help build better software in the future, even if it is not a development platform, right? There are so many other development platforms. This is basically a complete archive that needs to be live online, tracking what is going on around the world, possibly having all software in it, and providing you a panoptic view of everything that is going on.
Right. So it's a beautiful thing. It's the preservation of our heritage. It's a valuable cultural memory for society. Is it useful for anything?
Absolutely. Very good point. That's the reason why I was mentioning it is not just the past, preserving past. It is actually useful today. So let me give you an example. You have many, many different examples. Let's start, for example, from a researcher. Okay, you are a researcher. You are working on COVID-19 or something like this. You are sharing software information, models of proteins or antibodies or whatever. This is typically encoded in source code somewhere. When you want to exchange information between researchers and people, you want to point to the exact description of the version of the source code that you have been using to get your result. Because if you don't have exactly the same version, then you cannot reproduce the result properly. Okay? So imagine that now you wait for a couple of years or 3 years, and then you go and find a paper from 3 years ago. from researchers in Bosnia that actually found a cure against COVID-24 that we hope not to see, by the way. And then in this paper, there is a description that says, okay, the full code of the protein or whatever which is needed to kill the virus is available there. If this there is just a URL, we are probably all dead, right? Because the URL just decay very quickly. If it is a hash, a cryptographic hash of the source code that points to what is in software heritage, then you're sure that you can find exactly the right version. Okay, so you see that's a first use, a very simple use, which can change the way we share information when we actually do research and science. But then there are other things. Like for example, when you are doing software development or you are managing industry or you have issues like compliance, respecting the obligation of sharing the source code of the software that you are reusing and embarking your own components, then software heritage is providing a very simple way of satisfying this obligation, because you can just deposit the software in software heritage, having this hash that points to the full status of the software, and then we preserve the software for them. So this is a direct, useful thing to do. But even more than that, now, there are issues about attacks, cyber security, etc., etc. So if you want to have a secure system, then you need to have full traceability of all the components which are available. So what actually we are doing in software heritage, it was not the original objective. Okay, the original objective was building an archive and preserving everything. But it turns out that we are actually producing a kind of uniform, universal knowledge base which is open and transparent, where you can actually go and track the origin of all the different components that you can find around. And so this has pretty much a lot of value when you try to build a software bill of materials, for example. But probably, let me stop here again, because there are three examples. Maybe we can move to other things.
So I have a question that may be naive, and an error, and it's informed by my my study of geology. There is in the history of the Earth is written in rock, and there's a lot of missing rock. There's a missing rock from about 1 billion years ago till about half that time ago, and that's when there was something they call informally snowball Earth. Basically, glaciers covered the Earth and scraped away everything that might keep a record. And I feel like we might be in a time like that in a digital world. History that's written on paper and in stone carvings and other things like that tend to last. But if I have everything I know in the cloud and I don't pay my bill, I lose it. And I think there's a real risk that we're living in a period that because everything is digital, it may all be lost. And I don't know, how are you storing this in such a way that many generations hence they can retrieve it? Because it seems to me that there's, if it's all digital, it may not last. I mean, those are just numbers remembered on media that may rot and may be thrown away and the rest of it. So I'm wondering how you face that.
That's a very, very, very interesting question. Actually, I'm 57 right now, okay, so I cannot say I'm really young. But when I remember I was young, starting with computer science, which was fascinating for me. I had this bias of thinking that, digital information lives forever. I mean, we had this impression that what we are doing, since it is virtual, it can live forever. Then very quickly I started to discover that digital information is actually much more volatile than anything else. I mean, you lose a USB key and you have lost gigabytes of data. Okay, it's not so easy to lose your library this way, physical library. And actually, yes, digital information is extremely fragile. But then, here, for example, when we keep track of software source code, we are in a special situation because software source code is just textual information. So not losing it over time is easier than preserving, for example, images or videos or sound, because in that case you need to keep track of all the converters on the codecs, etc., or even just, Office documents. Who knows how to read a WordStar document today? I'm not sure. You can have anything important that can read it really clearly. But source code is textual information. Textual information is easier to maintain. So the other question is, how do you make sure that we do not lose our data? Okay? Because if it is just a textual information, that's easy to record. But how do we make sure not to lose our data? But the first point when we designed storage from the start was to try to minimize the risk of failure and maximize the chances of having this data preserved over a long time. So the first approach is technical. So of course we keep this information in a spatial format, which is simple and does not depend on the particular tools used to develop software. So it doesn't depend on your version control system or package manager, etc. It is stored in a very simple, clear format. The second point, we make copies. So there are copies of our data in different places. One in our own data center, one is on an open data set on AWS, which is sponsored by Amazon. A third is on Azure, sponsored by Microsoft, but these are all under our control, okay? So we make copies, not to lose data this way. But, it may happen that I wake up in the morning, I'm crazy, and I want to destroy everything I did. So this is something I could do with 3 copies which are under my control. So the second step is to set up an international mirror network, a network of mirrors. And the difference between a mirror and a copy is that a copy is under my control. A mirror is under the control of somebody else that has an agreement with us, which is possibly in another country, possibly under another jurisdiction, and they keep a full copy of this. So if we go away, they will stay. And then we already started doing this. So we had a first agreement with ENEA, which is a very large public research organization in Italy. We have an agreement with a company in Sweden, and we hope to have more people joining this effort. So you see, this is actually protecting us not only from the technical issue. If my data center goes down, there are others that are there, but also from legal challenges. Because imagine that this copyright reform we were mentioning before had passed in Europe. That would have been a gigantic setback, not only for us, but for a lot of developers. But if you have a mirror in another country, under another jurisdiction, then there's an extra layer of protection in this. And now we get to your real question from the beginning. What do you do for the long term? Now we have agreements with national archives, which are in charge of a long-term preservation, under tapes or whatever, that we are trying to set up. It's not an easy thing to do. Now, then if you think about things in 1,000 years, well, that's another story, because in 1,000 years, I do not know if there will be a computer or somebody will actually care about what we did today. So for the moment, I'm looking a century, not 1,000 years. So then we will see along the way how to handle all the rest.
That's an interesting question, because I don't know what faith I have that Microsoft and Azure or Amazon and AWS will still exist in 30 years, much less in a century. Absolutely. And 1,000 years. All of our history right now, for the most part, is written in bits. It's a really interesting question, I think, and the larger question is, really, how do we preserve something so enormous for such a long time? I'm wondering about, old languages, for example, that are no longer taught or much known. I'm thinking of people who wrote in APL or Fortran, but much loved languages like Lisp, which is still around, and everybody nods toward Lisp, but they don't use it much. So, and I'm wondering if you even go back in time and say, what can I recover from that stuff? So I'm just curious about it.
Yeah, it's that's an interesting question. I wonder if you know how many programming languages are around. Because that was an interesting question we had at the beginning. I mean, once you build an archive the size of software heritage, of course, natural question is how can I use it in an interesting way? So I should be able to search software which was written in a particular programming language, or I should be able to rebuild the compilers for a forgotten programming language. So the first question was how many programming languages? Well, not if you know, but there are only 7,000 and something natural languages, human languages, including languages nobody speaks anymore. Okay, but there are over 8,000 different programming languages. And there is a whole community of researchers that actually is very fond of doing this kind of work. They have a taxonomy of programming languages, over 8,000 programming languages. And so one big challenge now that we are building this gigantic archive is actually to identify each and every one of them, all the variants in the contents which are in the archive. But this is actually research. We are not ready to do it yet. I mean, in modern software development platform, I mean, if you go to GitHub or Bitbucket or GitLab, you see the different checkboxes that allows you to look for programs in Java or in JavaScript or in Python or on C or C++. But they just recognize a few hundreds of them. What about the other 1,000? Because many of them are kind of lost. So, yeah, one of the points is actually to go and find all of them.
So that does raise the question for software heritage of, are you also taking any steps to preserve the execution environments and runtimes and tool chains for these software systems that you're recording, so that it's going to be possible for researchers in 500 years to be able to manipulate the code that's in software heritage?
Yeah, that's a very important point. I mean, let me give you a short answer. The short answer is no, we are not taking care of executable at all. But let me explain. Yes, executable are extremely important, but maintaining executable in running in a system over time, this is an extremely complicated issue. You have many, many different approaches around, for example, Docker images, virtual machines, emulators, tons of different approaches all around. And a lot of people are already doing that work. So instead of trying to maintain the executable ourselves or the environment ourselves, what we want to do is partnering with this other initiative to make sure that then it will be possible at some moment in time to tell you, look, this particular source code, which is archived in software heritage, can be compiled using this compiler and linked with this library, which can also be compiled. I mean, you can loop it around pretty well on that particular machine, which is virtual machine or a lightweight container or whatever new technology will come out. I mean, or an emulator at some moment in time. I mean, these links. So the mission of software heritage is just the source code, not because other things are not important, but because software source code was the only thing nobody was taking care of before. And which was kind of a surprise 5 years ago when we decided to start this initiative, which is, by the way, not my initiative alone. I mean, there are many incredible people like Stefano Zacchiroli, Jean-François Brematic, and many others that are on board on this mission. And for example, if you like geeky technology, for example, what I really would like to see is a generalization of tools that allows you to actually rebuild your binaries from scratch, starting from all the source code components. So you have a full description of the declarative, full description of the system you want to build, and you can reproduce it from scratch from the source code. There are examples of these things, like, for example, tools like Geeks or Nix and IX, which are being developed and deployed today. They are not yet very, diffused, but we already have established connection with them in such a way that if they keep these declarative recipes that allow you to rebuild the binaries, they can make sure the software source code from which they rebuild the binary is available by coming to software heritage. See, so we are part of a bigger puzzle. And we hope this collaboration will be growing in the future. There will be more interconnection with these other initiatives.
Right. Now, it's easy to get hold of open source software because it comes with the freedom for you to grab the source code. All you need is the magic connector. But your mission is to get all source code, including closed source, proprietary source, a heritage source. How are you getting on with that? You know, I know you've got some of the source code to the Apollo program. Are legacy code bases giving you their code?
That's a very important question too, because again, my heart is, as you know me very well, Simon, my heart is open source, not really proprietary software, but here in this mission is actually to get all of the software. Because in the long term, one famous economist said, in the long term, we are all dead, but let me turn it in a positive way. In the long term, all software source code will be open source, okay, after 70 years. If you can get hold of it, then the copyright protection is apparently disappearing. So if we can get everything in the long term, everything will be open source. We want to have it. Now the question is how to do it. When we designed software heritage, we actually analyzed what it means to have all the source code up there. And there are basically two dimensions, okay? One dimension is a technical one. So is it easy to get a copy of the source code, or is it difficult to get a copy of the source code? Is it online, so on some website or development platform, or is it on punched cards or some strange tape or 3 inches floppy disk or some strange things? These are the technical dimension. Then you have, as you described, a copyright dimension. So do I need to talk to a lawyer to get a copy of the source code, or am I free not to talk to a lawyer and get the copy anyway? So, of course, 99% of our work from the beginning have been in the quadrant which is easy technical, easy legal. It is essentially all of open source, right? Modern open source that you try to get. The Apollo 11, that's another interesting story, because the Apollo 11 source code was actually in the public domain because the United States has this beautiful provision that says that everything which is done with federal money belongs to the people. I would love to see something like this in France or in Europe, right? Everything done with federal money belongs to the people. So since NASA was a federal initiative, then all of the source code of the Apollo 11 was in the public domain, but it was printed. So a lot of people had to spend an incredible amount of time to actually extract it from the printed copies in the MIT libraries and upload it in different places. Then the copy went to GitHub, and then we archived GitHub, and so we have a copy of the Apollo 11. But that is a kind of an easy thing, okay? So you don't have to talk to a lawyer. You only need to crowdsource and have some people which are volunteering their time. This was Rob Barkley who did the work on the Apollo 11, incredible guy. He went to see the Apollo 13 movie, and when he came out of the movie, he said, I want the source code, and he actually spent 10 years to get it out. And kudos to him for doing this. But then you have a last part, the last quadrant, which is complicated. How do you get the source code which is still maintained today and which is actually proprietary? We would like to get even that, because otherwise, if you don't plan for that part of the source code today, it will be difficult to extract it in the future. So we have a strategy for all the 4 quadrants. It's easy to get technically, need to talk a lawyer or not, and difficult to get technically, need to talk lawyer or not. In the 4 quadrants, we have strategies already set up. The one which is working very well is about on open source, available software today. We start to work with a software which is open, so no need to talk to a lawyer, but which is difficult to get historically. So there is a protocol we have set up with UNESCO, because we have a partnership with them, to describe exactly how to recover landmark legacy source code. And we have started doing it in collaboration with universities or with museums. And we have also strategy for the other quadrants, but which are not yet realized. We have plans, but we do not have yet the resources to actually move in that space. We hope to get there in the coming years.
Right. So what range of sources of software today is Software Heritage able to automatically archive? And while you're answering that question, I wonder if you want to mention the grant program so that people who are watching the program can actually join in with Software Heritage's activity.
Thanks, Simon, for reminding this. This is extremely important. So just to explain to the people listening to us, building something like Software Heritage is extremely complex because you need to get software from so many different places. So the analogy with the Internet Archive is partial. Okay, archiving the web is very difficult because it's so huge. But technically, getting a copy of a website, I mean, you have a standard which is HTTP, then you type get / I'm simplifying, okay, and you get the index page, and then you follow the links, and that's it. For source code, that's a mess, because to get the list of all the projects that are on GitLab, for example, you need to talk to the API and the event feed of GitLab. To get the list of all the source code projects which are on GitHub, you need to talk to the event feed and the API on GitHub, and they are not at all the same. If you want to get the software from Bitbucket, then you need to learn to talk to Bitbucket as a platform. And then when you get this software out, I mean, some is maintained under Git, some is maintained using Mercurial, some is maintained using Bazaar, or it is a package format which can be a zip file or a tar file or a Debian package or a Python package or whatever. It's an incredible Babel tower. So how can you solve the issue of Babel Tower? You need translators. Okay? You need translators to talk to these adapters, to talk to these platforms, and adapters to transform all the different version control system package format in this simple format we are using for the long term in the archive. We cannot do this alone. We need help. We need help by people who are experts, know how to talk to this or that other particular platform. And actually, we managed to get some fund money from the Sloan Foundation to actually give out small grants to people that want to help. Because, you know, I'm also a free software developer. I have been volunteering for such a long time. But here we would like actually to contribute some money to the people that want to contribute to this mission. Actually, it is not our money coming from Sloan. I'm very happy to say thanks to them. But we are trying not only to be an organization that looks for money for the archive, that we need, of course, we need a lot of funding to do whatever we are doing and we need to do, but we are also trying to get money from other funders to help developers, fellow developers, help build Software Heritage and not going directly through us. And thanks, Simon, for reminding this. If somebody is interested in this, just go to softwareheritage.org/grants. You will see what is open right now. We see examples of people that have already started contributing here.
I have I'm looking here. I noticed that on your site you've got 9, almost 10 billion source files, over 2 billion commits, and 152 plus million projects. I'm thinking that this ought to be one heck of a resource for a developer working on something currently, and I'm wondering how developer working on some random project might think first, second, or third of, hey, I'm going to go to Software Heritage and see what's going on there. Does that happen much, or how do you show up for those people?
I do hope this will happen in the future, but we are not ready yet. You know, I mean, we are. If you let me take the analogy of the Library of Alexandria that Simon mentioned, when you build a library, where you start by laying the foundation, then you buy the books or find the books, you put them in the basement, then they build the top layer, you build the door, you build the counter, you start having a register, a catalog, an index of everything you have, and then at some moment you have your grand opening and you tell the people come in, and then you can look in the catalog and find what you want. So we are in a kind of a mixed situation right here. So we spent 2-3 years building the foundation and amassing all these contents. I mean, 3 years ago, you only had the counters. You didn't have access to the source code because the door was not open. Now we have opened the door, so you can come and browse the source code and actually select a section of it and get intrinsic identifier that you can put in the documentation. And this is really, really nice. But it is not yet everything we are dreaming of. So we would be dreaming of telling you, hey, this is a trendy software library, which is trendy, which is more active in development today. We would like to be able to tell you, look, this in particular piece of software we were using here that you think is no longer maintained because the main branch trunk is dead, has been dead for 2 years. Actually, we can tell you it has been taken over down there by somebody that made a copy and is keeping working on that. And we should be able to let you search inside in a very intelligent way inside the content of the archive. But building this, is kind of building a Google of software source code. And we do not have the resources of Google yet. Who knows? Maybe you will help us have this kind of resource, but we don't have the resources yet. We plan to do things in this space. We hope to do things in this space. But again, we need help for doing this. And remember, all our software heritage, everything, is open source. There is not a single line of closed source code in everything that we do. So anybody can come and help, but beware, it's a very complex system right now. Okay, and lending a hand is not so easy, as people know when they are developers. But there is space for providing incredible new functionality on top of this universal archive, exactly because it doesn't depend on a particular technology or a particular development platform. It really tries to bring in everything, including the long tail of a small development platform, tiny development platform, which are all over the planet, that may contain interesting piece of software which is not visible in bigger platforms, which are more popular today.
So you were talking a little bit there about the building the library. It struck me when I first heard of software heritage that another hugely important use for it is providing people with a canonical reference to a particular generation of software, so that, for example, you could stand up in court and say, well, the software as it was running on January the 7th, 2021, following the Capitol insurrection, that version contains something, and there is an immutable reference to the absolutely certain version of the code. Have you designed that capability into software heritage for you to be able to have a canonical reference to a particular point in time of the ever-moving river of software?
Absolutely. Thanks, Simon, for pointing this out. Again, this was designed at the beginning because we had this idea of preserving things over time. When you want to preserve things over time, you need to know what you get, where, how, and when. Okay, so we need to trace everything that you do. And so all the archive is built in such a way that every single software artifact which is in there, a file, a directory, a revision, a commit, release, a full status of the version control system, has a unique intrinsic identifier, which is actually cryptographic key, built using a Merkle tree technology, which is standard today, that allows you to say this is exactly the status of the piece of software in a particular moment in time. And then we have a full database that tracks all the visit and the origin that we have seen, so we can tell you at this date, this state of this software was exactly this one. So this is extremely valuable when you actually try to do supply chain management, or as the example that you mentioned, in court. Or you can think about, really building software bill of materials when you're handling issues about cybersecurity or something like this. You want to know exactly what went into your particular final product. It's important to be able to track every single software component in a proper way. This is not exactly what people do today, okay? People tend to use component names and versions. Okay, you say this library version 2.1 or this jar file version 1 something. But this version 1 something, this is just a tag put on top of an object. It doesn't come from the object itself. And so it's possible, it's not good, but it's possible to change the object and keep the same tag. Actually, when you use Maven, for example, it's something that happens every now and then, okay? So people think that they are using the same version or the same jar. It is not the case. They have the same tag, but not the same content. While our identifiers are designed in such a way that if you have two different concepts, you do not have the same identifier. So nobody can change the content behind your back without you noticing. And this is an extremely important property.
And presumably that means that for the first time ever, people writing academic papers can actually cite their software as one of the resources to the results that they're producing. So, because I mean, software has been this impossible thing in academic research where people talk about the concepts and they are able to cite papers and they're able to talk about algorithms as they're expressed on paper. But software has been something that you've never been able to point at. Presumably that could revolutionize the process of academic rigor and research.
It is absolutely true. Let me say, I mean, for me, it's kind of a dream come true. I remember when I wrote, I have been writing paper describing software system for ages, okay, one 22 years ago, another 10 years ago, then the two examples I have in mind. And every time I wanted to do the right thing, I mean, to make the result of my research open, to make my software publicly available, to be able to pinpoint, as you say, inside my article, pointing exactly to the part where the important article is present. And I didn't know how to do. So I put my software on some institutional repository that were closed down, then on for example, a real case, on Gitorios that was closed down 2015, so the web was to 2012, and they didn't have a way of pinpointing the fragments which are important for me. Now, using software heritage, what is actually revolutionary is that you have two things. One is cryptographic identifier intrinsic that allows you to pinpoint something that doesn't change. And the other is the fact that the software is an archive. So what comes in stays there, which is not the case with the development platform, right? So you can actually write a paper and pinpoint 22 lines of code, putting a reference in your article and being sure that later on anybody will find exactly the same 22 lines of code, but exactly in the same context, in the same directory, in the same commit, in the same part of the development of the software that you wanted to pinpoint. And this is a game changer for science today. It's really a game changer, but it will take time to be adopted. Like if you remember, I mean, Git was developed in 2005, 2006. It took some years for people to actually understand how that technology was revolutionary. Now everybody considers it just as a given. So I do hope this will happen with software heritage too. It will take some time because it is really revolutionary in the way it allows you to do research, reproducible research today. But it takes time. You need to show, to give example. If this was not a radio show, I would give you a demo. So it's no point in doing right now. But I mean, I will be more than happy to point you to some videos where some demos are available. Probably some links are already under online under the show.
So one last question before, because we're actually running out of time here. Algorithms are just a massively important topic right now. They are made of software. They're most famously used by social media to nudge people into engagement, but are also blamed for many things. And lately I'm involved in conversations around how can we get our own algorithms? How can we get an algorithm I can execute on my own machine behind a firewall against the world, where, for example, I can look through all my old receipts, I can look through old photographs, I can do facial recognition, I can do stuff like that right now are the province of large companies. And I've been in conversations with you, is there any code laying around that I could actually use for that if I wanted to build something and it does that? So I'm wondering how much paid to that. And I hate to say I have to make it short because we're pretty much out of time.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yes, I have a tendency to speak a lot, but this is really a passion. That's the reason I'm spending my life in what is the rest of my life in this kind of work. Actually, yes, getting hold of, thanks to the open source movement, today you can get hold of an incredible amount of incredibly nifty technology. But for some of the things, the source code is not enough. Okay, particular today, many things that you find in artificial intelligence, machine learning, or this kind of thing, the source code for training the models, this is available everywhere, openly. But the machine power to actually train these models and getting these models efficiently, and the data on which to train these models, is not easily available. So that's a big challenge. How can we democratize access to the full stack that is needed to have what you want, which is also my dream? I would like to have my cloud, not a cloud, which is somebody else's computer. I would have my cloud, which is my computer that I can access remotely. And this is still not democratized enough. I do hope we will get there.
So we always close with 4 questions. One is, I feel it's a dangerous one. Is there anything we haven't asked that we should have, but you could answer in very short?
Oh, yes, there is a ton of questions, of course, but maybe one question would be, how can people help such a project? Well, first of all, let me say, this is not my project. This is not the project of our team. This is not the project of the institution that launched it. It is actually our project. It's a project of all of our community. And everybody is welcome to help. First thing you can do is come and visit, look at the website, have a look in the archive, see if your source code is already there. If it is not there, click on some places, there is a button that says Save Code Now, and you can save your code. This is something you can do very easily. Then you can contribute to the source code, to the development. You can apply for one of these grants and doing something. You can convince people you are working on to become sponsors on Software Heritage and helping us pushing the agenda forward faster and providing with more advantages. Or just very simple, talk about it. Let other people know this exists.
A quick one is blockchain. That's our control question. We ask everybody if you have anything to say about it, and nothing is a good thing to say too. So, do you have anything to say about blockchain?
Yes, I can tell you. I mean, there is an internal joke in the team for different reasons, but I mean, I do not have time to go through it. But Software Heritage, in some sense, due to the technology we use, is already half of the blockchain. Okay, so all the technology we use, the Merkle trees, etc., it's half of the blockchain. What is missing is a distributed algorithm for a ledger. But this is something that could be built with a mirrors or different kind of things in a way or the other. And that would be useful for the application that Simon was mentioning, for example, to have independent verifiability without trusting us. That, for example, the status of the software project at a given moment in time was this one. Okay, we could add that layer. We are not going there yet now. Okay, it is not our priority. But if somebody is interested in doing something like this, why not? They can try.
So, last 2 questions, or one question actually. What are your favorite your favorite text editor and scripting language? I normally have.
Okay, you want me to make enemies or friends? Depends. Okay, anyway, but I will be very transparent because people know me. I mean, my favorite text editor is Emacs. I know that people using VI would not be helpful. Well, okay, you need to choose your camp. I mean, just an Emacs guy for a long time. I can use VI.
We need more votes for Emacs, so that's good.
It's good? Okay, fantastic. I'm happy. And scripting languages, my research domain was actually programming languages. So the point is that I think I used, dozens of different languages over time. So it really depends on what you need to do. So in an average day, I may be using a little bit of Perl, a little bit of Oak, a little bit of Bash, a little bit of Python, depends on what you do. I mean, so it's what comes more handy at the moment.
Excellent. Well, Roberto, this has been a very full hour and probably a little more than an hour. I've gone a little bit over. So anyway, but I totally appreciate it. This has been a fabulous show, and I hope we have you back soon. It's been great.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot for having me today. It was fantastic having the chance to talk with you both.
Yeah, excellent. So Simon, on reflection, as briefly as we can make it, because I think we're running a little long here. What's your take on that?
Oh, I'm a massive fan of software heritage.
Yeah.
On the flippant side, it's all built with Merkle trees. I assume people are aware that Git inside is using the same data structures and data structure managing algorithms as blockchain does, Merkle trees. And it may be software heritage is the closest thing we have yet to a blockchain application that is good for society rather than just sucks its life out of it. But more than that, this is the Rosetta Stone of the digital age. This is the place where the archaeologists of future millennia will come to find out how our society actually runs. And the fact that it's being produced by simply the smartest team of developers and politicians and business people that I've ever met anywhere in the tech industry is an additional blessing. Because everyone's like Roberto on this team. They're all super smart and yet too humble to tell you to your face that you're stupid. And, everything about this is great. So I think it's great. It's very young at the moment. It's only, as Roberto was saying, 5 years from launch. And this is one of those long now projects. This is something which is going to come into its own in 10, 15 years after it has passed on to the next generation of management and engineers who are running it. So, but even now, it's got massive potential, massive value, simply that it's got pretty much everything that's happening in the digital world is there in one place at the moment.
Yeah, I love it. I'd love to see more. It's probably already there anyway, but coherence and cross-fertilization and the rest of it between this and the Internet Archive, and Long Now as well has been, I think, is doing good work. So we've run this one long. So any plugs really quickly, Simon, before we go?
Not really. Life in lockdown has got a limited number of things that are worth plugging. I've started a Substack, so you'll find me on mesh.substack.com. I've started writing again, and there's an article every Tuesday and Thursday at the moment coming out on my own website. So I'd love to have listeners and viewers go along to meshinsights.com or to mesh.substack.com to go and follow that. And I don't object to people donating money in our donation mechanisms, but it's not a precondition of reading, because I'm not a big fan of paywalls. How about you, Doc? What are you up to?
Well, I'm up to resisting starting a Substack, because it's another silo, and I don't want to be in a silo. And it's it's probably defeatable. Maybe you could try. Their URLs are the links that they have are their own, and they obscure what others can see, and they have a lot of tracking in it. But maybe I'm wrong about that. I don't know. It's clearly a slick, cool way to work, and a lot of good people I know are using it. I'm very active in Customer Commons, so customercommons.org. Look for a lot of changes there. We could use help there too. Anybody wants to get in touch with me and volunteer, very interested in having the help. So thanks so much, Simon. Thank you, Roberto. Next week I should be looking at the schedule. Oh yeah, next week we have penciled in at the moment. We have Eric S. Raymond himself, ESR. So I'm hoping that happens. It isn't nailed down yet. He will be on at some point. But I'll tempt you with that one. And thank you so much. This has been FLOSS Weekly. I'm Doc Searls, and we will see you next week.
Hey folks, I'm Ant Pruitt, host of Hands of Photography here on TWiT TV. I know some of you have gotten yourself a brand new camera, or you just had a camera sitting around and can't quite figure out how to get the most out of it. Well, I have a solution. my show, Hands on Photography. So subscribe right now to learn how to get the most out of that camera. I'm going to show you how to make those images pop. I don't care if it's a Canon camera. I don't care if it's a Sony, Nikon, iPhone, Android, even an inexpensive Android device. I got you covered. So head on over to twit.tv/hop and subscribe today.